Thank you for joining us today on our July 2024 monthly webinar series. Hopefully, not too many of you are tuning in today at work and instead are getting ready for a nice 4th of July weekend, getting the grills going, some hot dogs, hamburgers, hopefully seeing some amazing fireworks if weather permits. I know we're looking at some storms potentially, and hello to anyone who's watching the recording. So for today's webinar, I like that it's a day before Independence Day because July 4th has always been one of my favorite holidays, being a celebration of the founding of our country almost 250 years ago. But I've always seen it as a celebration of freedom, the freedom to pursue our happiness, which is written in our original founding document, the Declaration of Independence. And I love that it's so close to Independence Day, a day before, because what Justin's going to talk about today relates greatly to our own pursuit of happiness. And what I mean by that is while there's, I guess, a small majority of Americans who enjoy working and see themselves doing it potentially forever, or at least a very long time, there's a great deal of us who want to achieve financial independence and eventually retire. And while that entails accumulating, enough assets to live comfortably during those years, it's also imperative to manage your assets during this phase of your life in a way that minimizes taxes and gives you overall more freedom and more flexibility to pursue your own happiness. Justin Rice is a financial advisor here at Personal Wealth Strategies with over a decades-long experience in the retirement field, advising hundreds on how they can make their retirement plan the most optimal by using many different tax planning strategies. Justin is a certified financial planner since 2015, utilizing that knowledge to help all those he works with accomplish their financial goals. With that, Justin, why don't you take it away and discuss some steps to create a less taxing environment for us?
Thank you, Ian. And what if you actually could? What if you actually could live out that American dream? That American dream that our forefathers 248 years ago on July 4th, 1776, when they were putting in the final ink of our independence. What if you could live that life that they would dream? And I would submit that it is 100% possible. And so today, I'm going to be sharing some things that will definitely help you on that American dream journey into your retirement and presenting ways to help make it less taxing. And so when I talk about taxing, I'm talking from the literal sense of the verb in terms of paying less in your tax to the federal government, but also in a taxing way of an adjective, making retirement less onerous, less wearing, less stressful on you, and less taxing. And so we want to make it less taxing in both ways. And so that's what we are really going to be focusing on today. And we're going to be talking about 5 key strategies to help make this overall less taxing retirement a reality. Now, the first is to minimize that income tax. And we're going to be talking about a lot of different strategies and sub-strategies in there. Maximizing Social Security benefits. That is a key piece, a key cornerstone of many people's retirement benefits. Number 3, protecting the portfolio from risks. Number 4, protecting yourself from risks and your family from risks. And then number 5, making your wishes known. Oh, so Justin, you mean like a will? Well, no, but yes. I mean, a will could be a part of it, but there's so much more in terms of making your wishes known and organizing your estate plan than comes to meet the eye when just a will. So let's talk about the minimizing taxes. And one of the first foundational principles that I want you to grasp, because a lot of people talk about tax brackets and focus in on the tax brackets. But in our work, what we look to do is focus in and hone in on the tax rate. Now, they may sound very, very similar, even the same, and I'm going to explain the difference to you. So the tax bracket is the actual tax bracket that you're in, typically federal. Most states, if they charge an income tax, have some type of bracket system as well. But for the general audience, we're going to be focusing in on the federal tax system. And so the federal tax system, the brackets start at 10 and go to 12, 22, 24, 32, 35, 37. Those are the tax brackets. And yes, if you fall into those brackets, that's the percentage that you're going to pay. But that's not all that you're going to pay. And so, what the tax rate takes into consideration is the total amount of tax that you're going to pay for one extra dollar in income. And it could be phantom taxes. What do I mean by that? I mean that it's not necessarily going to be reflected in the tax bracket or even the tax system itself. So, a prime example of this is Medicare premiums. If you have an income that's over a certain threshold, your Medicare Part B and Part D premiums are more expensive. So, this you're not going to see reflected on your tax return per se, but it is an additional amount, a tax that you will pay for having additional dollars of income reflected on your tax return. And you have to be cognizant of this starting at age 63. But Medicare doesn't start until age 65. So why do we have to worry about it at 63? Well, because they use your tax return from 2 years prior when they're calculating all of these various benefits. And so, yes, there's different ways if you have a life-changing event to potentially reduce that and not pay the higher amount if your income is lower today. And we look at all of those different planning strategies. But the key is that you need to start looking about these things sooner rather than later. Another example are there's credit phase outs. So yes, your tax bracket may not be increasing. You may be in that 22, 24%. But as you continue to increase that income, you could phase out of particular tax credits that you're eligible for. And so yes, your bracket's not increasing, but your total tax bill is because you're losing out on some of those credits. Another area is tax on investment income. And so you have investment income. If you have a low enough amount of income, your investment income actually could be 100% tax free. But as you start to pull in income from other sources, potentially Social Security, IRAs, pensions, that investment income starts to phase into taxation. And there's even a point where there's additional taxes of 3.8% Medicare surcharge taxes uh, for the investment income in excess of certain levels. And so paying attention to those thresholds, that's not necessarily reflected in the tax rate, but would in the tax bracket, but would be when you're looking at the overall tax rate. One thing that I actually have a slide on that's quite interesting is the Social Security tax torpedo. Now, they have these flashy names for things. I think tax torpedo sounds really cool, but it could be potentially catastrophic to your retirement tax bill. And what it refers to is the interesting way in which Social Security is taxed. So, federally speaking, Social Security, if you have a low enough overall income, is completely tax free. So you get the Social Security, you can spend that entire amount. In New Jersey, Social Security is also tax free. So if you just have Social Security income, you're not going to pay any taxes from a federal or state level here in New Jersey. Now, as you increase more income, something interesting happens. And Social Security, that income will start to phase into its taxation all the way up to the maximum level, which is 85% of your Social Security being as counted as taxable income. And so what that will do, if you're in that particular phase in period of Social Security, this is where the tax torpedo comes into play, meaning you have one extra dollar of income that you're adding to your situation. So this could be, let's just say, a distribution from your IRA. So you're generating one extra dollar of income, but that one extra dollar of income pulls in 85 cents of its Social Security friends to be taxed as well. And so that $1 you're actually taxed as if is a $1.85. And effectively what that would do, let's just have an example that you're in the 22% tax bracket. That 22% tax bracket, if you multiply it by 185%, you actually pay a tax rate of 40.7%, which is shocking to a lot of people that the taxes could be that high on something, 40.7%, especially in a relatively, modest level of overall income. But that definitely happens. And so if you look at even just the tax brackets, you could be making $1 million, $2 million, $100 million a year and not be in a 40+% bracket because the highest right now it is 37%. And so that doesn't seem quite fair, But that's how the tax system works. And that's why focusing on tax rate is going to be so much more effective than looking just at the tax brackets. And something else I want to touch on here, tax brackets only go up. So the more income that you phase in, the higher your tax bracket will be. But tax rate can actually go both up and down. And what that has in terms of planning opportunities is, for example, let's say we're in that tax torpedo of 40.7. Perhaps it makes sense to power through that. Tax rate goes back down to that 22%. And then we strategically do an area of planning called a Roth conversion to take advantage of those lower income tax rates during retirement, or even potentially before you even start taking Social Security and RMDs. And so what is this Roth conversion? Really, what the Roth conversion is giving you the ability to do is to choose when you want to pay your taxes. And so when the money's in a traditional IRA, traditional 401k, there's no taxes owed on it. It's just growing tax deferred. You're only going to pay taxes when you take the money out. And in fact, the government has rules in place where if you wait too long, they say, time to start to take the money out. It's going to be age 73 for some, age 75 for others, depending on the year you were born. But at some age, you're going to be required to take money out, and that's going to generate the taxes at that point in time. Whereas a Roth conversion, what you're going to be able to do is take money from the IRA, choose when to pay those taxes in what year. And so if you have a generally lower tax year, or you have a year where you can go back down in your tax rate from one of these other things that we're looking at, like Social Security tax torpedo. One thing that I didn't mention specifically in New Jersey for our New Jersey friends, and there's other equivalents for various states as well, that is the pension exclusion here in New Jersey. And so your IRA distributions, your pensions are not taxed up to certain levels. And when you start to increase your income above certain thresholds, that will retroactively cause those previous dollars to be taxed. And so you could actually have a situation here in New Jersey where $1,000 of extra income could lead to you to pay more than $1,000 in taxes if you just barely cross one of these thresholds. And so, which is if you're doing the math at home, above a 100% tax rate. So that's like crazy bonkers to think about, that you could pay over 100% for your tax rate, because that doesn't exist in the bracket world, but it is 100% possible if you hit the thresholds just wrong. And so back to the Roth conversions here, the benefits of it, number one, anybody can do a Roth conversion right now. There's no income limits, no contribution limits. There's no restrictions on Roth conversions. You just trigger the taxes. Eventually, once it's in the Roth, distributions are generally tax-free. There are some rules that you have to follow from, if it's your initial Roth in terms of a 5-year rule, but generally those distributions are going to be 100% tax-free. The Roth, no required minimum distributions. So unlike the traditional IRA where they're going to be forcing you to take money out, a Roth IRA doesn't have that. So you can leave it in there forever and leave it to eventually, if you don't use it, to your beneficiaries who are also going to be able to take advantage of that Roth IRA money 100% tax-free. Now, there are some drawbacks. So that money converted is going to be taxable today at ordinary income rates. It's going to increase your current taxes owed in this year. And so if your strategy and your goal is to pay the least amount in taxes this year, then a Roth conversion isn't going to be for you, because you're going to increase your taxes this year. But our goal, and what I would suggest your goal as somebody trying to pay the least amount in taxes overall, the most efficient way possible, is to focus on your lifetime tax bill. And so not necessarily this year of what taxes we're going to pay, but what taxes are you going to pay over your lifetime? And in fact, we can even take that a step further if you wish and look at beneficiaries to say, what's the least amount of tax we can pay over generations? So not even just in our lifetime, but over our generations, in terms of how can we efficiently leave those assets to our beneficiaries so that overall we can pay the least amount to the federal government. Now, another thing we looked at from a tax maximization or tax minimization optimization standpoint is asset location. And so here I'm not talking about asset allocation, which is another thing that is definitely valuable. We definitely analyze and look at and want to optimize from a risk return perspective. But asset location, what we're talking about here, is how do we hold those assets? And so you can see a general, this is very overly simplistic, with general portfolio on the right with, a bunch of different funds. And then you see your different account structures. So you may have a Roth IRA, a traditional IRA, and a, just general taxable brokerage account. And so the question becomes, when you combine these two and you look at where those funds are held in which account, that affects your taxes. And so we can make those strategic shifts to make sure to optimally have the portfolio fall under its proper asset location. And what this will do is it won't change. Just holding the asset in a different account won't change your overall rate of return. So if you hold a fund, the same fund in your Roth IRA versus your traditional versus a brokerage account, your rate of return is going to be the same because you're holding the same fund. But what this will affect is your net after tax rate of return. And by making sure you have efficient asset location, that will help to optimize the situation. Just to give you a quick example of this, let's just say in general, Roth IRAs, the tax-free, you want to hold the asset that's going to have the highest expected rate of return. Because since it's all tax-free, we want to have that account have the largest amount of growth in the future so we can make sure to get the most amount tax-free. A tax-deferred account, like a traditional IRA, we generally want to hold tax-inefficient assets there. Assets like alternative investments or assets like bonds that are going to pay ordinary interest, ordinary income interest, have that tax deferred. Because if you held it on the outside, that interest is going to be way highly taxed. And then something like a taxable account, if you have a just general total U.S. market fund, you're going to be able to hold that with very low turnover in your taxable account and really not pay a lot in taxes anyway, even though the account is not tax deferred, because you're only going to be paying taxes on the dividend income, which is going to be mostly qualified dividends anyway. And it's not a stagnant thing either, because as tax laws and rules change, that could change where the assets fall in our ranking. And so, for example, real estate, which was generally low on our ranking, which we would typically, want to hold in tax deferred accounts, with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act changed and the introduction of the 199A deduction, getting a little technical here, but at the core, what that did was make the real estate income from those portfolios a lot more tax efficient, therefore tilting the scales a little bit more, where we would want to hold that in a taxable account versus a tax deferred account. And those are all the different things that we look at from tax optimization. The final piece that I'll look at, on the slide, we call it the widower's penalty. When I want to be a little bit more controversial, I'll actually call it the death penalty, because that's exactly what it is. It's a penalty on the death of a spouse from a taxation standpoint. And so when a spouse passes away, you can still file a joint return in that year, in the year that they pass away. But the next year, you're forced to file a single return. And from the brackets in a single return versus a joint return are drastically different. And so this potentially leaves the surviving spouse with a much higher tax bill. So let's take a look at what this would, potentially look like in practice. And again, Roth conversions piece here could help to mitigate this, because we're going to be taking advantage of, paying taxes now while we have a known rate versus an unknown rate in the future. And so let's look at Hank and Roberta. These are fictitious clients here. So not based on anybody in particular, but let's just say in 2022, Hank unfortunately passed away in December. They're still able in that year to marry filing jointly. Let's take a look at what their income is in that year. So they've got bank interest of $2,500, qualified dividends, $3,000. They've got Hank's Social Security coming in at $29,000, Roberta's at $13,000, and then Roberta's joint and survivor pension at $65,000. And so after adding it all up, doing the tax return, that's not something we do here, but you can just trust us here for this calculation. The tax bill would have been $8,653 in that situation. Now, 2023, what occurs? Now, Roberta, because Hank has passed away, must file single. And so will bank interest change that much from year to year? Well, not really. Assuming that she keeps the same amount of money in the bank, it's going to be generally the same. Qualified dividends, assuming that the portfolio is the same, it's going to be generally the same. The biggest difference is going to be Social Security. Now, Hank passed away. His Social Security was 29,000, but because of how the Social Security rules work, that benefit, because it was higher, doesn't go away. Roberta is able to take on Hank's Social Security benefit. Now, she does lose her benefit, so that's going to be $13,000 less of income in 2023 for Roberta. And she's still obviously going to get her $65,000 pension. But what happens to the tax bill in that year? So with $13,000 less of income, you would imagine that she should pay a little bit less in taxes because she's had a little bit less in income. But in fact, the tax bill is almost 50% higher in 2023. And so she's going to be paying over $12,500 from a tax bill, whereas it was only $8,600 the year before. And that's why we call it, or I call it, the death penalty or the widower's penalty. All right, so let's take a look and dive a little bit more into Social Security. And by the way, we did a full webinar on Social Security. If you want to dive into all of the different nooks and crannies, we're just going to cover it generally today. But the biggest thing that we like about Social Security are three things. Number one, guaranteed by the federal government. Say what you will about, the U.S. in terms of its finances, but being guaranteed by the U.S. federal government is still one of the strongest guarantees that you can get to this day. Again, July 4th, great nation, 248th anniversary happening tomorrow. Hope everybody can celebrate. Number two is it's inflation adjusted. And so there are very few things that can keep up with inflation. And so we love that benefit. And number three, it's tax efficient. But Justin, you were just talking about the Social Security tax torpedo and how it's like you can get up to 40.7% of a tax rate because of Social Security. How is it tax efficient? Well, if you think about it, there could be no taxes paid on your Social Security. That's pretty darn tax efficient. But even at its worst, 85% of your Social Security becomes taxable, meaning you're going to have 15% tax free. There's no other income that does that right now. So that income source has many, many benefits. Now, I mentioned the state of the federal government, its finances, and obviously there's a Social Security trust fund that's going broke. You'll see all of the different headlines and scare tactics on this, but really, it's not something that you should worry yourself with. Yes, if you're relatively young and you're watching this webinar, one, great on you for preparing early. But if you're in the realm of even thinking about preparing for retirement, your Social Security benefits are going to remain substantially the same, is my prediction. And I don't make predictions. And so meaning that it will probably happen that way. There may be small adjustments here or there, but let's look. What is that worst case scenario? Well, the Social Security Trust Fund is projected, depending on what study you look at, to be depleted in 2034. I've seen calculations as early as 2031 to 2035. So yes, if we continue on the path we're on, the trust fund will run out. But what does that mean? It doesn't mean that Social Security benefits are going to completely stop and you're not going to be able to claim any of the benefits. What it means is if Congress doesn't do anything, which as we get closer, if they don't do anything and people are going to have this reduction, there's going to be riots in the streets. And so Congress will do something eventually. The longer they wait, the more painful it'll eventually be in terms of the changes. But my hope is and my confidence is in Congress to actually act. So this won't happen. But even if it does, what will happen is you will have benefits be about 77% of your actual benefits. You have about a 23% or so reduction in your Social Security taxable benefit, Social Security benefit. And so that could be, the difference between eating and not for some people. But I would submit for those on this webinar that it would just be something that we would have to look at and plan in the, for the portfolio, potentially taking more withdrawals in that year or whatever. But there would be solutions. And something else that's reassuring, it's not our first rodeo. It's not this first time that we've been here trying to fix a Social Security program. 1983, they needed to do it. And there's actually pretty simple strategies to be able to fix it. But at the end of the day, how you fix it is you increase taxes or reduce benefits. And nobody wants to do either. And so that's why it's going to be the wait and see game until they absolutely have to address it. So hopefully they address it sooner than later, but they will address it at some point in time. The tax efficiency of it, I just really said this. The worst case scenario is that 15% of your Social Security is going to be tax free on the federal level. And in New Jersey, it's 100% tax free. So no New Jersey state tax and no federal state tax on 15% of the benefit. The best case scenario is that it's 100% tax free for both the state of New Jersey and the federal government. And that is pretty darn tax efficient. The final piece of it is the inflation adjustment that I mentioned. And so if you look at this hypothetical scenario of year one, when you're claiming $2,500 a month, 30 years later, assuming a 3% annual increase each year, the benefit would grow to over $6,000 a month. Now, you're not getting any real benefit in terms of being able to do more with that. But what it does is you're not buying less. So $2,500 today versus in 30 years is going to buy you a lot less in 30 years. And so having the ability to have an income source, be able to keep up and keep pace with inflation is potentially quite huge. And now, the other thing about Social Security as well is what we were just, for example, looking at in Hank and Roberta's situation, is that you have a penalty-free joint option, meaning that if you're the higher income earning spouse, that income will continue till the end of both of your deaths. And there's no reduction for that. So if you're a single person, as an example, claiming your Social Security benefit, and let's say it's $30,000 a year, that will continue until your death, and then it will end. But if you're married and your benefit is $30,000 per year and your spouse is going to be less than that, that $30,000 per year will continue not only for the rest of your life, but for the rest of your spouse's life. And you don't have to pay any additional for that. It just is built into the program, which is quite unique. And so generally speaking, if you're the higher income earning spouse, just general strategy, you want to delay as long as possible. And if for some reason, you want to claim your benefits early, it would be better to claim on the lower earning spouse because the benefit decision there is less important. And so you can claim earlier for the lower earning spouse, but typically speaking, in general circumstances, now everybody is going to be unique in this. And so you want to look at your particular situation, but having that higher earning spouse delay, the lower earning spouse can actually claim earlier to be able to, at least claim some benefits. Now we're going to transition over here to look at risk because in life, nothing is without risk. Even from an investment standpoint, if you say, yeah, let's go all to cash and say, I don't want this market risk, well, you're still going to be taking on some other type of risk, namely in that situation, inflation risk, because now your money's in cash is not going to be able to keep up with inflation. So I'm just going to highlight some risks here that we'll go through, and there's way more than even on this list here that we could potentially go into. For example, sequence of returns risk. We did an entire webinar just on that one risk, and so I would encourage you, if you're interested, to look back at our YouTube channel, all the previous webinars we've done as we go much deeper into a variety of these topics. But let's take a look at the portfolio. Obviously, there's a lot of different assets: stocks, bonds, real estate, cash, and even annuities that can be introduced into the portfolio to make your retirement better. But what are those various risks in each of these assets? So if we look at stocks as an example, you have market risk as the greatest risk, because if markets go down, your portfolio is going to go down, you have less money. That's not a good situation. But from a longevity, from a liquidity situation for stocks, very, very positive. So typically, the longer you hold stocks, the better you're going to do. So that's a good thing. And our markets are very, very liquid. You can put stock orders in, assuming you have the right type of stocks today, and immediately turn it into cash to be able to spend. So it is quite liquid. Generally speaking, it keeps up with inflation, but not exactly. That's why it's in yellow. And interest rate changes do have some effect on your stock and investments. But then you go over to bonds. Well, bonds do isolate yourself for the most part from market risk. There is still some market risk, especially in sectors of the bond portfolio. For example, if you go into high yield bonds, which, by the way, in our portfolios, typically we don't, because we take our market risk in the market, and in the bond portfolio, we want protection. And so from a market risk perspective, the high yield bonds are going to be much more vulnerable to slowdowns in the economy and be correlated, meaning go down at the same time as stocks, which is why we don't necessarily like to hold them as a true diversifier to the market. Still very liquid as well in terms of most bond holdings, but interest rates, highly interest rate sensitive. And we saw that in 2022 when interest rates dramatically rose, bond prices dramatically fell. So they've got, definitely interest rate risk there. Longevity risk as well, because bonds typically don't grow as fast as stocks. And so you could run out of money sooner and are not going to keep up with inflation as well as stocks either. Now, what about cash? I mean, excuse me, we'll get to there. Real estate. Real estate, being a real asset, tends to keep up with inflation better than both stocks and bonds. You have some, ties in with the market, and so there's some risk there. But liquidity for real estate, if we're talking about the real asset, is quite low. So it's much harder to turn a physical home into cash than it is your stock portfolio into cash. Now, in today's market, with inventories being quite low in real estate, it's going to be easier, and the liquidity can move over time. But in general, much harder to convert real estate into cash than something like a stock or a bond portfolio. And it's also still interest rate sensitive. So as interest rates have risen, that tends to slow down the real estate market as well. Now, as promised, looking at cash. So cash, full protection from market. So the market's not going to affect it. Obviously, it's liquid. You can use cash right away. Interest rates have no effect because you're basically just holding short term. But what do you lose out on? Inflation. Inflation is a huge risk from just holding cash, not being able to keep up with the overall rising of prices. Cash won't do that over the long period of time. And because of that, it's very hard to maintain the longevity of cash in your portfolio and protect yourself from longevity risk. And then finally, looking at something like an annuity, something like Social Security that can give you a guaranteed income or a pension, that is protected from market risk because that check is going to keep coming regardless of how the markets do. And after they're in place, interest rates have very little effect on annuities. They have a big effect when you're purchasing the annuity. And right now, with interest rates being high, it has been it's a long time since annuities have been this favorable in terms of the amount of guaranteed income that they can provide. And so they have an effect, interest rates have an effect when you purchase an annuity, but from when you start taking income, no effect really. And then longevity. I mean, that's what they're built to do, guaranteed to pay you out for your entire life expectancy. And so very, very good on the longevity side. Now where they're going to potentially falter, liquidity. Once you've got money coming out of an annuity, very hard to say, all right, hey, I know I've got this $2,500 a month coming in. Give me an extra $5,000 this month because I got a big expense. You're not typically going to be allowed to do that with an annuity. And if you are, you're going to affect your future income. So not a place we would look for liquidity. And also very few are going to be able to keep up with inflation. There's some that you have, a chance for increasing income in exchange for potentially a lower income now. But typically, these types of annuities are going to have an income that's guaranteed, but it's not going to increase. And so you do have inflation risk there. And so what our job is to look at all of these various assets that you can hold and have the exact right allocation of them for your situation so that we can mitigate as much risk as possible. And so when risk pops up in one area, like inflation in 2022, we can have some protections for that. And really what this looks at is something called the efficient frontier. And even for somebody that's like saying, I want to take the least amount of risk possible and go into something that's like, totally protected, like cash, for example. I mean, we just saw that if you go 100% cash, you're going to have risks there of inflation, longevity. And so, well, let's go bonds. Let's go 100% bonds. And you see on this chart here that 100% bonds has a certain risk return characteristic. On the bottom is risk. So going from left to right is more risk. So further to the right is more risk. On the left side is returns. So going from the bottom to the top is the rate of return. And what is fascinating about and this is Nobel Prize winning research about the efficient frontier. What is fascinating is that 100% bond portfolio, if you include a more risky asset class, which, being stocks, you can actually reduce the risk of the portfolio and increase the rate of return. And that's exactly what this efficient frontier is showing. And so if you, add a little bit of stocks, going from 100% bonds to 25% stocks, 75% bonds, you actually decrease the risk, increase the rate of return. And you want your portfolio to stay on this efficient frontier. So you're always taking the least amount of risk for the highest expected rate of return, and risk measured in many different types of ways. Okay, shifting on to number three, protecting yourself, your family. What does this all look like? Healthcare is huge. Health expenses, I believe, still are the number one cause of bankruptcy here in America. And so you want to be able to make sure that your health coverage is intact, all leading up to retirement and through retirement. Now, at 65, it's easy because of the Medicare system. And we can talk through, if traditional Medicare is the way to go, Medicare Advantage plan, there's a bunch of different ways. Oh, and we did a full webinar on Medicare. So definitely tune into that. But let's say early retirement, pre-65, if you're not going to be able to claim Medicare, what do? There's a lot of different potential ways. You can look and extend through COBRA. You can purchase through the health exchange. And by the way, that's another hidden place for tax rate, because if your income is low enough, you can actually acquire premium subsidies to help pay for your healthcare via the marketplace. And if your income is too high, you're going to pay the full cost of that healthcare. So that's not reflected in the tax bracket, but it would be reflected in something that we look at in your tax rate. And then there's other things that aren't necessarily healthcare, the share care, the faith-based healthcare that you can pursue if that's something of you, if you're interested in. But really looking at all your different options and making sure you have the best for you. That's something that you should do. Long-term care, something related very closely to healthcare. You see the stats, but stats really, don't hit your emotions. What your emotions will hit is when your parents, or grandparents have actually gone through this, and you actually have to go through this situation and start to pay those bills. Women, by the way, will have care longer than men typically. And so, all of the nursing homes and home health aides and high costs could dramatically impact the portfolio. So looking at having a solution, or if this event occurs, how will you pay for it? And immediately everybody goes and thinks, oh, here's an insurance pitch. Here's long-term care insurance coming in at you. That's not always the way to handle it. And even in the long-term care insurance arena, there's the traditional long-term care insurance that some people still buy, but because of the expense of it and the fact that if you never actually use the insurance, you lose everything. There are some other asset-based long-term care or life insurance-based long-term care products where you can combine a couple different needs in terms of combining your life insurance need with your long-term care. And if you never use long-term care, you still have the life insurance benefit payout tax-free to your beneficiaries. And asset-based long-term care where it's rather than fully self-insuring, you say, hey, I've got this money over here that's going to be used for long-term care potentially anyway. Why don't I just shift this asset over to the insurance company and get a leverage for that, so I can get a even higher benefit out of them if I do need care? And so those are all different things that you should potentially look at to optimize your portfolio and make your retirement less taxing. Life insurance, I briefly mentioned having appropriate liquidity at death. So making sure that, especially if you have a life-only pension and you're going to miss out on that, you don't have any survivor benefits to that, 50% or 100%. Losing out on a pension could be harmful drastically to a widower. So we talked about the death penalty from the taxation standpoint, but what about, if that's pension, you actually lose income. So I'm sure they would love to pay the extra taxes if they still had that income coming in. So protecting that, protecting the loss of the lower Social Security check. What if inefficient savings overall, you can't even pay for funeral expenses. So, or if you just have illiquid assets like businesses or real estate that can't be accessed quickly for cashage, you still might have some things that you need cash for to have life insurance for that. The final piece, that fifth piece that I promised to talk about today, and we're going to be wrapping up. If you have questions, please definitely put them into the chat or the question arena, and we'll be able to take a look at those. But making your wishes known, and what does that look like? I mentioned it's more than just a will. That's definitely a foundational piece. But what about your finances at an incapacity? And here we're really talking about your powers of attorney. And there's a couple different ways you can set up, and we're not legal professionals here. We're not attorneys. So to actually draft these documents and put them in place, we're not going to be doing it. We can kind of help talk generally about what that looks like. For example, in powers of attorney, and it also depends on state specifically as well. You can have, for example, a springing power of attorney. So at your incapacity, it would give your agent that you say in the document the ability to work on your finances and do financial transactions for you, but only after you're incapacitated. So while you're still of sound mind and body, uh, it doesn't go into effect. But there's potential downsides in that, meaning that if you do have an incapacity and there's a need for financial movements immediately, well, there has to be a court to come in to say, yes, this person is incapacitated, the power of attorney is valid. So, on the other hand, you could do something like a durable power of attorney that gives the person immediate ability to have access and fiduciary abilities over all of your finances. But you better trust that person because they can act for you immediately once that document is put into place. And so those are all the different things that you need to talk about from a power of attorney perspective. Then you have healthcare. Your healthcare at incapacity. What are your healthcare wishes? Do you have a healthcare proxy? Who's going to be making those decisions? Do you have those decisions that you would want ideally in writing so that they can be followed? What does that look like for you? How about tangible assets at death? Do you have anything specifically like jewelry that you want to make sure to go to a specific person? A collection of guitars? Do you want to have a specific your real estate? Do you just want to leave it to everybody equally, or have that go to specific people? And so all of those tangible assets that you have, how are they going to be distributed at your death? And thinking about that. Your financial assets. We have with our clients a who gets what conversation, meaning that if you have two children, it may not make sense to leave things exactly 50-50 to them. How the heck is that possible? Isn't that going to be unfair? Well, maybe if you want to be completely fair, it actually can't be 50-50. And what I mean by that is, let's say you have two children. One is a higher earner than the other. Not saying anything about their values, about how good a person they are, but one is making more money than the other. They're in a higher tax bracket. And if you've got a combination of Roth IRA and traditional IRA, and you just leave it 50-50 to each of them, that's actually going to cause the higher income earner to net less at the end of the day because they're going to be paying higher taxes than the other sibling on that traditional IRA. Whereas if you design it unfairly and leave potentially less assets to the higher income earner, but leave them the Roth IRA, they're going to net substantially the same amount as their sibling, and Uncle Sam is the one that's going to be missing out. And so looking at all of your financial assets and how they're left as the beneficiaries is something in a conversation that you should be thinking about and having. And finally, digital assets. And in today's world with cryptocurrencies, digital assets might bring up, Bitcoin, Ethereum. I don't have any of those. And even if you do, you definitely want to make sure that you've got a plan for those and access to digital wallets and all those things. But digital assets also include your photos and your pictures that are stored in your computer. If you got it password protected and you're the only one that knows the password, all of those could be lost upon your death. Your email, your social media accounts, all of those are forms of digital assets, and making sure that you have a plan to leave those, to the extent you want to your family, and giving them instructions on how you want those handled are going to be crucial to your overall situation. And so hopefully, we were able to give you some tips and tricks and things to think about. But here's a bonus step. Number 6, finding your Sherpa, finding somebody that can help guide you on this journey, because there's a lot of complexities and you don't know what you don't know. And we can help educate you as much as possible via these webinars. And you can go back and, watch every single thing that we've put out, or every single thing every other financial planners have put out at this moment. But then if you stop paying attention to it and actually living your American dream in retirement, doing what you want to do. And I mean, unless you super enjoy reading the tax codes and all the different releases and, 2026, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is supposed to sunset, and you're going to stay on top of everything consistently, and you like that, great. But if you don't, and you prefer to enjoy your retirement and go out on the beach. Ocean City, Maryland, the beach is literally right there outside of this window. And to be able to enjoy that, have some suntan, swim in the ocean, is going to be much more enjoyable for some than staying up and reading the tax code legislation. So leave that to somebody, your financial Sherpa, to be able to do that for you. And we at Personal Wealth Strategies obviously can help you with that. So with all of the things, thank you for attending. And Ian, I will throw it over to you for any questions that might have come in through the chat.
Yeah, we had one question come in, probably because a lot of the tax talk at the beginning. But the question is, what's the difference between my marginal tax rate and effective tax rate?
Yeah, great question. So looking at marginal versus effective tax rate. The effective tax rate, I'll start there because the whole talk of tax rate itself, we were talking at the margins, meaning what's that next dollar going to cause in terms of taxation? And that's what we as financial planners look at because that's what we control. What your effective tax rate is if you just look at the total taxes you're paying versus your total amount of income, what's your effective tax rate? So if you have 200,000 of income and you pay $50,000 in taxes, that your effective tax rate is 25%. And that's okay to give you a general idea about how much taxes you're paying. But when we're actually looking at planning, we want to focus in on the marginal rate because your marginal rate typically is going to be much higher than your effective tax rate. And that's where we can do things like Roth conversions, plan around the edges, and make sure we don't cross over these different thresholds so that we can optimize your tax situation. That's a great question. Yeah, effective tax rate versus marginal is definitely important conceptually, but in terms of our planning, we tend to focus more on the marginal tax rate. That also includes, by the way, if you're not in retirement and you're saving and you put money into a traditional retirement plan, you're saving money at your marginal rate. And so if you're in a 24% bracket, you're taking and you're putting your money into the traditional IRA, you're saving 24% your marginal rate, whereas your effective rate may be 15, 16%, you're actually saving 24%. And so looking at the marginal rate from a planning perspective is going to be more important than the effective rate. A great question. Anything else, Ian?
Nope, that was the only question that came through.
All right,
That
awesome.
means everyone understood everything that you said.
I hope so. And I hope everybody is getting ready to join the celebrations tomorrow on July 4th, Independence Day here in the US. And if any of this resonated with you and you say, yeah, I'd like some help, we'll have a link to schedule a financial acceleration session. And in that financial acceleration session, what we will do there is no sales pitch, no, gotcha, manipulative tactics to say, hey, invest your money here in this hot stock. What that financial acceleration session will do for you is to help you identify in your specific situation what risks are you most exposed to. How can you specifically look at your Social Security? What are you planning to do now? Do you plan to take it as soon as you can, or potentially delay? What are your, the different taxes that you're paying, both from the state and federal, and how can you optimize it? Is a Roth conversion right for you? That's where we answer all of those questions. And if you want ongoing help, that ongoing Sherpa to take a lot of this load off of your plate to help optimize your situation, and you don't want to focus on it, that's exactly what we do. So we will, click the link, be able to have that financial acceleration session, and we'll be able to, help guide you on your journey.